Today is March 13th. I hope you are doing well. We're going to pick it back up about remote work again today. I see that I've gotten a lot of interesting comments from yesterday's discussion, which talked about remote work and it focused on this article. One second. If you did not check this out, basically me speaking on how Thailand and Vietnam are pushing for remote work to save energy because, as you know, the world is in chaos. The US is at war with Iran, and the same with, that other place, Izzy and Iran. And that is impacting the world economy. It is impacting the energy system, the energy industry. Pardon me. Thank you. The energy industry, as well as how companies are going to have access to oil and reliance on energy. And that, of course, is going to impact corporations and government, which then trickles down to employees and the people within society. And so, for that increased cost and stress and burden, of course, Thailand and Vietnam are looking to go back to promoting remote work. And this is something that I focused on yesterday, and the understanding of corporations needing and governments needing to recognize what was learned from the pandemic, and that was that remote work is essential. It is essential to operations. It is essential to reducing the burden of not only employees or citizens, but the governments and businesses as well. And I'm going to highlight that with a lot of statistics today that I've found to kind of match up with what I've also been speaking about. And I think that's important because there's a lot of misconceptions when it comes to remote work. Of course, the understanding is that, yes, not everyone can work remotely. Not all careers and jobs allow for people to work remotely. That is understood. But that does not mean that new opportunities cannot come about as we move more to a modern society that is embracing remote work and modern forms of working. So that's something that needs to be understood as well. How we work today is not going to be how we work, of yesterday, and how we will be working in the future. And that's all about how we embrace these modern forms of technologies. So one of the questions that two questions that I'll say one question that I got, which focused on how remote work can increase spending for businesses and government, and my response was specifically, yes, it is understood that remote work is not for everyone, as I've just mentioned, but also remote work actually decreases costs for businesses. And I have statistics I will be calling out to justify my point. And also the fact that for companies that are actually losing out on and actually resulting in increased costs for them and losses for a business is because they continue to embrace this corporate ideology and understanding and thought process that to be a corporation, you have to have different forms of corporate real estate in all of these locations. But if you are effectively embracing remote work, you're not going to be investing in real estate. Or if you are, it's going to be at a smaller scale. And that is one thing that a lot of corporations did not do, as we've learned during the pandemic and still from the pandemic. There are still empty offices and empty buildings that corporations are still investing in and holding on to in their portfolio. Maybe for a rainy day to save later, maybe to lease out the property in some way, but regardless, they have continued to hold on to these investments versus reducing their portfolio. Now, every corporation has their own reasoning for that, but if you're truly investing in remote work, the understanding is that you are looking to no longer have butts in seats, right? You're looking to have a true remote operation where we are utilizing the technologies that we're investing in, right? And all the modern forms of ways of working and all the AI and all the automation and all these types of things, right? That's the way we're going to move about if you are truly investing in remote work. If not, then that means that you choose to not divest from these real estate properties and things like that. I'll be speaking on the statistics that I found from that as well, but I'll go ahead and go through on the statistics in regards to how remote work saves money. And It says US companies save around $11,000 per offsite worker per year because they are investing in remote work. And that's if they're truly investing in remote work and divesting from real estate. That means and when you have real estate, you have utilities, you have maintenance, you have on-site services. So if you're truly investing in remote work, you're ideally going to save more because you are investing less in real estate and what it costs to upkeep and maintain real estate and to maintain people being within these workspaces and and all of that comes with that. And overall, is statistics show that it is estimated to save employers over $30 billion annually by reducing investment into the average understanding of how work should be and investing more in a modern work design, which includes remote work. So that in itself is $30 billion collectively annually if there is investment in remote work. Mind you, 11,000 annually per offsite worker, basically per employee, $11,000. 1 second. Also, as I mentioned yesterday, there's so many statistics out there that focus on how remote work is beneficial for people, but then you have statistics that are out there that say that it's not beneficial. So when we're speaking about remote work, it's all on how it is invested in and how it's implemented. Mind you, if it's going to be invested in and implemented into an organization, it needs to focus on the human first. That's what all this is about, right? As even with this article, it's focusing on, yes, how it's impacting the corporations, but it's impacting the individuals as well. Mind you, those costs trickle down into your workforce. And if the workforce is bearing the burden of these costs and the stressors that come with whatever, whether how Thailand and them are focusing on energy costs, that trickles down into the workspace and the individuals as well, or how we're looking at how a business implements actual remote work. So, how individuals are still feeling when they show up to the workspace, even though they're at home in their safe space of home, they're still entering a workspace that is virtual. So you still have to invest in that, how you communicate, how people are appreciated and valued, how work is being calculated, how micromanagement is still going about, because there's still ways to micromanage, even though people are not within the workspace and the leadership can't see you directly. There's ways for them to see you by monitoring the equipment that you are assigned, by monitoring how much work you're getting done by the keystrokes and all those types of things, the mouse click, all of that, depending on where you live. In the United States, I'm in the United States, so depending on where you live, some of that stuff is illegal, and in other states it is allowed. So that also goes into other HR issues of what is allowed and what is not allowed. But regardless of that, there's still ways to micromanage and have a unsatisfactory workspace, even though it is remote. And that's where people forget that regardless of how individuals are working and where individuals are working, you can still have bad leadership, and that bad leadership can hinder the effectiveness and the efficiency of how people are working, how people are feeling within the workspace, and how people are showing up within the workspace. That all revolves around the leadership that you have. It is not the work design or the workplace that you've created. It's all on how you're managing that workspace, and that's one thing that must be understood. And that's why you can see where you will see in some workspaces where people are thriving and others where they are not thriving. And it doesn't matter if it's remote or in person or hybrid. It's all on how how the system is designed and how leadership is managing that system. So that's one thing first and foremost that must be understood. And that's why issues come into play. I mean, yes, and then that goes into retention and engagement and all of those big fancy words that I'm not even going to speak about, because I'm here to speak about the basic as understanding of why it can be effective and why it cannot be effective. This is so that everyone can understand this. And as we already know, we're already in a technological boom when it comes to AI and modern, technology. And it's just obvious that we're in a remote work design, regardless of the pushback that is out there. This is the wave of the future. This is the new modern way of working and how work will be. That's just what it is. And especially when you see all of the things that are going on around the world now with the war and just different things that are going on. And then just working with different businesses in different countries and having employees in different countries. You got to remember, here in America, we're dealing with a lot of immigration issues. So even then, that's where the modern day workforce is going to shift again, and an embracing of remote work and having individuals that are more contracted workers versus employees. That's also another way to get around it when we speak about all of these new laws that are being implemented and who we want to do work for us and how we want people to work for us. The shift can even move that way. And then that also is a safeguard for corporations as well, because then they don't have to worry about a lot of the laws that are in place based on how people work, where these people live, and who these people are. And that in itself shows how remote work can be embraced. So that shows how the modern way of working really is. And there's no real limitations on that. And I think that that's something that must be understood. And we also need to understand that just because we're focusing on remote work, that does not mean that new opportunities for ways of working that aren't remotely can be created. And we also, and I think that's the one thing that keeps being forgotten. There's ways of having forms of remote work where you're still in person, or where it's kind of a one man operation type thing. When we look at ghost kitchens, I guess it's a good one, where you have a restaurant, but it's not really a restaurant. You order from it, you don't sit down. Your food is just delivered through whatever food delivery service, or you choose to go down there and pick it up. Some have the pickup option, some only do delivery. That is one thing that we should learn from the pandemic, was businesses that were created like that. Those are kind of remote style restaurants, if you really think about it. So when we speak about how remote work also is changing how we design the workplace dynamic, that's a great example with ghost kitchens. A lot of people don't really think about it that way, but it's a modern style of operating your business. And even how, when we look at DoorDash, and how people can even have their restaurant or whatever even through their home now. So it's different because of how we're utilizing technology. These are examples of how technology is changing how people are operating businesses and operating their workspaces and creating new workspaces, even within the home. So that is something to be understood, as well as how new opportunities can be brought forth. But I think another thing that must be understood when we speak about remote work, and something that we don't think about, is oversight, and how oversight can be handled anywhere in the world. For example, the company Waymo, Waymo, that is the automated self-driving cars. And though it was found out that the operators of those vehicles were not American citizens, but were individuals that were living overseas, I think in India or somewhere like that, but they were not Americans, and these cars were being controlled by individuals overseas. That is an example of remote work. That is an example of a modern day workplace. That is an example of how there are no real limitations when it comes to operations and oversight, and how we go about executing whatever that product or service is that a business is, marketing to the public, or that is out here for the public, or just how a business operates overall. That's a main example. And something that must be understood from that is that also highlights differences in cultures, and how we need to understand the importance of embracing different cultures. Because when you look at a remote design, it's international, and we're working with everyone around the world, and those cultural differences can also impact how a business is operating and how a business is executing whatever goods and services that they're providing. For example, with the self-driving car Waymo, as I just gave an example of, they had issues with how the individuals were driving the vehicles and driving them down one-way streets and down the wrong streets and blocking traffic and things like that. And that comes from cultural differences. These are things where leadership has to recognize when we are embracing forms of remote work, as I mentioned earlier, that they have to have an understanding of how to have a strong system in place, how to ensure that these systems are designed, for the good of all and not just for the understanding of, lining the pockets for the corporation. I think that's the most important thing when it comes to remote work. And finally, the question was, or the suggestion was that, again, that remote work is expensive. There's no real data figures on that. Only that, uh, only that as I mentioned earlier, businesses choose to continue to maintain and invest in real estate, and then even though these buildings are vacant, that is one thing. And when we look at corporations and businesses, you have to make that decision. Do I want to have a fully remote operation? And if I do, am I going to embrace divesting from real estate, or am I going to choose to keep these extra costs? That is one thing that must be understood. That's where corporations take on that risk, even though they are forms of assets for a business, they are still a cost that they're incurring if they choose to do remote work and still maintain those costs. So that is one thing that must be understood. And on top of that, overall, when you look at the data, yes, remote work saves businesses money, but that's only if there is effective leadership. And effective leadership means that operations and the systems that are designed for a workplace are putting the human first, as I said, whether it's remote, hybrid, or in person. But the key is that, the most effective way is, for human first design to be at the forefront of everything. And that goes down to policymakers and everything, recognizing that remote work is reshaping commercial real estate. One second, I gotta let the dog out. The dog. Go ahead. Okay. Thank you. Pardon me. Okay. One thing we have to understand is that remote work is reshaping commercial real estate. It is reshaping how we go about our work designs and the modern place of work and what modern work is actually. What does that mean, to be remote work? Does that mean that I'm truly divesting from real estate, or do I choose to maintain operations as usual and hold on to it as an asset? Or do I choose a hybrid design so that I don't have to invest in other facilities and other types of, projects? So when I need to bring people in, I'm bringing them in to the space that I already own. So those are the types of decisions that corporations and small businesses have to think about. Now, me, I've been remote since 2011. The business that I've had has been remote since 2011. I am that modern day leader, and I am a champion for remote work, and I am highlighting that it is possible to have an effective business and be remote. Yes, since 2011, I've been doing this. So I'm here to tell you, not just because I'm an advocate, but that I understand systems, and systems require great leadership. Systems require strong communication. If you're going to have remote work, you have to have strong communication and emotional intelligence to help people recognize, what needs to be done without being micromanaged, without being the control freak, without, overseeing and investing in all types of technologies to tap in and be that big brother hovering over the shoulder, trying to figure out what someone's doing, with the assumption that you controlling how someone works is going to determine how effective they're going to perform, and that their performance is going to actually be worthy and valuable and profitable for a business. It's not. Control just creates unnecessary stress, which then in turn results in lower productivity and performance, because stress impacts health, which impacts an individual's ability to show up and perform. So these understandings need to be understood. Remote work will only be effective if there is good leadership, and and good leadership requires understanding the human and recognizing that the human must be first. That's pretty much what it is. Outside of that, yeah, you ain't gonna have a great outcome, because good leadership is the key to business success. And good leadership means that you recognize the human and you understand that the human is the heartbeat of a business, is what drives a business and what drives profits. It's not the tools, AI, remote work, however you design, all this and that. It is how you treat people and making sure that they are recognized and seen. And that's the key, and that is what must be learned. And that's the lesson for today. Human first, like always, respecting the human, recognizing the human, and being a good leader, which means that you recognize that leadership is about empowering, you know, versus more so just influencing. But empowering means we're going about change. We're leading the charge, right? And that means respecting others. That's the lesson for today. So until tomorrow, don't forget, be the change, love yourself and others. Bye.